Hi everybody, it's Stephanie here. Welcome to my channel. Today I have a very special video planned for you guys because the cake I'm making is based on one of my favorite movies and book series, Harry Potter. On this cake, the bottom tier will represent the Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle board game. The second tier is covered in the textbooks from Hogwarts. And on the top we have the famous sorting hat. I absolutely love this cake and I cannot wait to show you how I made it. Alright, come on, let's get started. Okay, here we go. I'm starting by decorating my board first, which is something that is one of my least favorite parts of cake making, but it makes such a huge difference so I don't want to skip it. Okay, so I've rolled out my light tan fondant, and to get the fondant to stick to my board, I'm wiping it with just a little bit of vegetable shortening on it first. I get my fondant into place, but it's not exactly big enough, so I'm just going to make it work by rolling it out a little bit more. Once I've got the fondant into place, I'm pressing a stone impression mat into it. After I've got it all textured, I bake it in the oven at 170 degrees for about 15 minutes. After my board has cooled, I'm adding some color with some food color dust. So I'm brushing some different shades of yellows and browns. I just fill in some of the stones, and then I decided to use my brown powder to completely brush all over the board. I then use the brown again to go into all the little tiny cracks. It took a while, but I really love how it turned out. Okay, let's get to the cake. I've had fall flavors on my mind lately, so I'm using cinnamon cake for this one. Using a sharp serrated knife, I'm cutting the top part of the cake off, and then I'm cutting it in half again. For the fillings, I've made some delicious cinnamon apples, and I'm topping it with brown sugar apple crumble. I'm adding another layer of cake and a layer of cinnamon buttercream frosting. I wasn't exactly sure how this cake flavor would turn out, but the extra leftover pieces sure are good. Once I've got the cake filled, I'm covering it in more cinnamon buttercream frosting. I also made a rectangular shaped cake, which will be the game box. Moving on to the fondant. Since this game box has very sharp corners, I decided to cover this cake in panels of fondant. I've measured each side and the top of the cake, and I'm cutting out the panels a little larger than my measurements. The game box looks like Harry Potter's luggage, or I think he calls it a trunk, so to mimic the texture, I'm pressing an impression mat into the fondant. I move my panels over onto a cutting mat, and I'm putting them into the freezer until they harden. Alright, my panels are all frozen, and it's easy to handle now. Before I can move it onto the cake, I'm cutting the bottom edge so that it is completely straight, and now it's ready to be placed onto the cake. To cut a perfectly straight edge, I place my ruler on top of the cake and I run my X-Acto knife along the top edge. And I do the same on all the edges. Since I'm making this look like Harry Potter's trunk, I'm adding a line where the trunk opens. So I'm first marking it by making small holes where I'd like the line to be. Using my ruler, I'm pressing a line into the cake, and then I use my sugar shaper to go back and make it more defined. Alright, I need to move my cake over onto my board, so I'm first spooning some candy melts onto my board to help hold it into place. Using a spatula, I lift my cake and I get it into place. Once you put it down, you have just a few seconds to move it around before it sets up. It's time to decorate it. Using a ribbon cutter, I cut out strips of fondant to mimic the straps on the trunk. There are some lighter tan pieces and some gold ones too. I got all those onto the cake, and then next I'm using a piping tip to make the little holes in the straps. I wasn't crazy about the color of the trunk, so I decided to hand paint it just a little. The paint is a tiny drop of brown food color gels mixed with a splash of vodka. It's kind of like a watercolor. I also hand painted the gold straps with an edible food paint. Next I'm aging the trunk by painting some scratches in it and making it look scuffed up a little bit. Next I'm moving on to the airbrushing. I'm using brown airbrush color to go around the edges and anywhere that I think needs some shading. I'm not the best at airbrushing, but I do feel that I'm getting better the more I practice. Next I created the locks by cutting out each individual piece. I used a rectangle cutter, a circle cutter, and some was just cutting freehand. And then I dusted them with a little pearl luster dust. Those then get attached to the cake with edible glue. Moving on to the logo. To make this, I've printed out the logo and I've rolled out a very, very thin piece of gum paste. It has to be like paper thin. I'm using satin ice gum paste for this. If you place the piece of gum paste over the printed logo, you can very faintly see the logo through it. I'm hand painting the logo with a mix of food colored gel and a tiny drop of vodka. For the Harry Potter letters, I'm doing it a little bit different. I'm using modeling chocolate for this. I picked modeling chocolate because it doesn't drag like fondant does. I also printed out the Harry Potter logo, and I'm using the back of a paintbrush to trace the letters onto the modeling chocolate. See how you can lightly see the tracing? Then I use my X-Acto knife to cut out the letters. I get both of my logos put onto the cake. Since my cake is based on the game Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, I'm hand painting some of the details from the game box onto my cake. Okay, I'm finished with the trunk, and now I'm moving on to the textbooks. To make these, I first cut out a few rectangles of cardboard for my books to dry on. I wanted the spines of the books to curve around the sides, just like a real book. Using a straight edge, I'm cutting my fondant. This is fondant with a tiny bit of Tylose powder mixed into it. I'm cutting my fondant, and then I drape it over my cardboard. Using my hands, I push the sides around the edges of the cardboard, and then I trim it down on the final side. These books can be decorated any way you like. I hand painted some, and I added more fondant details to some others. Just be creative and make enough to go all the way around your cake. Next, I need to add my dowels. I'm using plastic straws that I pre-cut to the same height as my cake. I get my next cake stacked on top of the trunk, and then I begin adding my books. You can just press them into the buttercream or add more buttercream to use as a glue if needed. Once I have them all into place, I'm brushing some black food coloring powder onto my books to create some shadowing. I was scared to use my airbrush in such small areas, but I did get my airbrush back out to color between each book. I really love how it turned out. Next up is the sorting hat. I'm making the sorting hat out of Rice Krispie treats. If you spray your hands with cooking spray before you begin, it helps to keep the treats from sticking to your hands. I'm molding it into the basic shape of the hat, and I keep adding more cereal treats until I'm happy with the shape. And then I cover the treats in a sheet of modeling chocolate to help smooth out all those bumps. Once I've got it all covered, I begin adding the facial details. For the eyebrows, I've rolled out a log of modeling chocolate and I press it onto the hat. No need for any edible glue as it sticks right onto itself. And then I continue with the nose and the mouth. I also added some random strips of modeling chocolate to make it look more wrinkled. And then I brushed it with a little water and I covered it in brown fondant. This is the one time I actually want my fondant to be wrinkled, which makes it so much easier. I then used my Dresden tool to scratch it up even more. Okay, for the brim of the hat, I'm using a cake pan as a guide to help me cut a perfect circle. I get that into place on top of the cake, and then I moved my hat over too. I then begin airbrushing my hat. I made sure to spray a little more color into the eyes and mouth and any wrinkles just to help enhance those. Next, I realized that I forgot the dowels, so I took the hat off completely and I added 4 plastic straws and 1 sharpened wooden dowel that is going all the way through my cake and down into the bottom board. There we go. And then I put the hat back on. I did redo the brim of the hat too because I broke it. Oh well, mistakes happen. Next up is the golden snitch. I'm rolling a ball of 50-50 fondant and modeling chocolate mixed together. I then dipped a lollipop stick into some melted candy melts and pushed it onto the snitch. To create the design on the snitch, I used my clay gun extruder to make a tiny log of fondant. And I used water to attach the log of fondant to the snitch to create the design. Moving on to the snitch's wings. To create these, I made myself a paper template. I rolled out a very thin piece of satinized gum paste and I cut out 2 wings. Next, I'm brushing the top edge of the wing with gum glue, and then I press a covered wire onto the top of the wing, and I begin rolling the top edge over to cover the wire. I then created the feathery look by cutting small strips in the gum paste with my X-Acto knife. I then pushed the wires into my snitch. I actually put these on backwards. Oh well. The final step in creating my snitch is painting it with edible gold paint. Alright, let's finish it. My snitch goes into place. And this is a non-edible wand that my kids made for me out of paper and hot glue.
Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned how to make your own Harry Potter cake. If you are on social media, please go check me out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Also, if you have any ideas for me, please tell me down in the comment section below. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.